Unicorns and glitter and taxidermy critters are just some of the things they like. They also enjoy 80s hair bands, Grizzly Adams and John Goodman, so if you think that's weird then you can take a hike. But the things they enjoy the most are making art and cracking jokes, so without further ado, here are your hosts. You've got your two artsy gals, your two artsy gals. Here are your two artsy gals.
Hey, this is Katie.
And this is Sharon.
And this is Two Artsy Gals. And today we are going to talk about paint. And the difference between different kinds of paint and when they work and when they don't work and what you want to use for what you're doing.
All right.
Sound good? So
that sounds awesome.
Sound good. I'm still delirious because it's still hot here in this little piece of hell they call Portland. So.
So, what's your favorite paint to use, Katie?
Acrylic paints by far.
Yeah?
I use them the most of any. What's your favorite?
I'd say acrylic and watercolors, because they're the only paints that I use.
Well, I like watercolor too in some circumstances, but I think that, and we'll go through the pros and cons of each kind, but I just think, and I think any mixed media artist would agree that acrylic paints are really the most versatile paint that you can use, or you can be used to so many different kinds. I'm going to start out today talking about watercolors and watercolor pencils, because I love my watercolor pencils. Even more than I love watercolors. I like the control of the pencil better. Mm-hmm. To talk a little bit about what watercolor is, they are made from ground pigments, and they're ground into a water-soluble binder. Sometimes they put like a fungicide in them and stuff so they don't get, because there is a little bit of moisture in them, so they don't get grody. But really, it's just a water-soluble binder and powdered pigments that are ground into it. And it comes in pan form, or you can get it in a tube. And I call the pans biscuits.
Biscuit.
It's a paint biscuit. That's what I call
them.
Yeah,
and which do you prefer, the tubes or the biscuits?
I actually have a brand. I think they're Koi brand I bought for a class, and it's in the tube, and I really like it a lot. So
yeah, I like the tube too.
But again, I really prefer my watercolor pencils. I like watercolors for doing like a bigger background.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to get detail, it's easier for me because I don't think I'm not really great with watercolors, and I feel like they're more of a free-flowing, messy kind of paint. But that's probably just because I'm really messy with them, because I have seen incredible detail by people who really know how to use watercolor. But it's easier for me to get that detail and the shading that I want with using the watercolor pencils.
Yeah, I do like them too.
But I feel like, for me, watercolors are really great with setting a mood. I feel like they're a little bit more, they lend themselves better to a little bit more earthy feeling in paintings, especially if you're doing any, of course, seascapes or any kind of water that you're painting. But I feel like that they just really lend themselves to like a natural looking style. So.
Yeah, I think there's just so many things. I mean, you can be really loose with them. You can be, I don't know. I like right now I'm looking at some portraits that people have done that are just,
mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That's just by this. I don't see how they get, because I use watercolor, but I use them in a certain way, and I don't know how the hell people get the detail that they do with them.
I think that it's, I'm looking at some portraits, and it's just like a suggestion by different little shapes, and it's not really even so much detail, how they just capture. And I think the really important thing with watercolors is really using the light and using the white background and really building on that. I think that's really important to make sure to allow that to come through, and how you're layering, working with your lightest to your darkest.
Yeah, definitely. You can use the white of that paper to your advantage. And You're talking, when you mentioned lightest to darkest, it reminded me that's one of my favorite things about watercolor is how easy it is to create like gradients and gradations of color just from the simple, like just from not even blending colors, just using more water as you, like adding water as you go along to drag the color out, or doing wash layers.
Yes.
That's another cool thing about watercolors. You can do a dry brush method. You don't have to use water with them if you're using the liquids. You can also use them, use them wet to stretch them or to make them thinner. And you can also use, I've seen a lot of artists, they prefer wet on wet. So they get their paper wet and then they paint with the wet watercolors.
Yeah.
In that situation, it makes some really cool bleeding effects.
And you can add salts. And you can add saran wrap to make textures for the background.
Oh, you see, now I never thought of that because I don't use them that often. So.
Oh, yeah. And then even like you can use masks so you can hold those whites. So there's like it's like almost like a rubber cement that you can paint on, so you keep your whites really white.
See, now I didn't know that. That's really cool.
To get those sharp details,
Would that be like in the same, like I have these just plain wax crayons that I use sometimes to preserve the white?
No, because you rub it
with acrylics. So.
Yeah, because you rub it off. So it's almost like you rub it off like you would like a like rubber cement.
So
like you roll it off and it turns into a booger.
Yeah. A rubber cement booger. I used to make fake boogers all the time with rubber cement.
Yeah, same idea. You'd probably love this stuff.
I totally would. I'm going to have to look for it, actually. So I think watercolors are really cool, and I really enjoy using them. I tend to use them more for backgrounds in my work, and then add, do other paint, like with other paints or inks or pastels on top of that for mixed media works. But I think some of the disadvantages of using watercolor are that you are pretty limited for surface that you use it on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's watercolor paper's about it. You can't use anything else because it doesn't cooperate with you, and it won't work on a canvas. Like, it has to be, I think the watercolor paper is porous and absorbs into the paper. So even other papers like drawing papers and stuff, I find that it doesn't work.
It just wrinkles and doesn't, And
there
really,
are some cool watercolor papers out there, though.
There really are.
Like the cold pressed cotton, like fancy. I love working with those. The texture of them, I use them sometimes just when I'm making journals. Yeah,
those were the ones that I would hoard. Talking about hoarding materials, I would hoard the really nice watercolor paper.
Yeah, I do that too. I probably have some in my paper stash right now that I've been saving for a long time because and I have like 3 different kinds of watercolor paper pads. Like I have one that's glued on all sides. So you peel it
those
off.
are the blocks. I love those.
Those are awesome.
Yeah.
I had to get one for, I think it was for a mixed media class that I took when I was still in college. And I have hoarded it that long. So, like, it's been about 4 years since I took that class, and I use it once in a while. But
they're awesome.
So, yeah. But again, watercolors are cool, but you are limited watercolor paper. That I think and I think also that it takes some finesse and practice to be able to use them and control them. Yeah. In a way that would like prevent bleeding or whatever. Unless, like I said, that's why I prefer watercolor pencils. Because I'm not good at using watercolors to paint objects.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that makes sense. Yeah. If you want that look, use the watercolor pencils. For sure.
Now I'm going to move on to gouache paints. Gouache paints are they're kind of halfway between watercolor and I would say acrylic paint in the way that they act. But really, gouache is basically like watercolor. They've just added more glycerin, so it's thicker.
Nice.
And you get a better coverage. They're really good for like if you want a real even color coverage. Gouache is great for that. I actually use gouache sometimes when I'm doing stamping with hand carved stamps. I paint them with gouache because it gives it just a nice, you can get really cool opaque colors with that. And it can also be used like watercolor very easily. You can water it down and you can do washes in the same way, but it also gives you a little bit of a different look and a little bit better coverage.
Can you use it on any kind of paper?
Yes. It doesn't have to be used on watercolor paper. Now, I would say if you're going to use it as you would use watercolor, that you would probably want watercolor paper.
Okay.
But I've used other paper. Again,
Mhm.
it's not great with canvas,
Mhm.
like on a canvas or anything like that, but I have painted fabrics with it. It works really well on all different kinds of paper. And I'm actually taking a calligraphy class right now
Oh, cool.
online, and they use gouache as calligraphy ink.
Cool.
I haven't got to that lesson yet, so
Uh-huh.
I can't really speak much to it, but my imagination is abuzz with the way that they would use
Yeah.
gouache in designing lettering and hand letterings. But yeah, it's really great. I actually just sold a box of it, and I wish I wouldn't have. I sold it in my garage sale.
Oh,
You
no.
know, every time you freaking get rid of something,
Oh, yeah.
then you find a reason that you shouldn't have gotten rid of it. This is
Oh,
why
yeah.
I hoard things, because when I get brave and say, oh, I haven't used this in like a year, I'm just going to sell it because I want money so I can buy more things to hoard. And then here I started this class on Skillshare, and they talk about gouache.
Yep.
I'd send my husband back to the art supply store to get me more gouache, and he hates going into art media. Well, it's not even art media anymore, it's Blick.
Yeah,
But
Dick
the only
Blick.
thing he hates more than going in there himself is taking me with him. So, because he knows that he's going to come out with way less money than he would
There
if he
you
just
go.
went in and got what I asked for. So,
That's a good man. He's a good man.
yeah, except for when he interrupts our podcast like he did last one. But, so yeah, I would play around with gouache. It's kind of cool. It's neat. It's a different feel. I'm going to move on to oil paints because I have a funny story about oil paints. I have been very intimidated by them, which I think a lot of people are.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a really good friend who works a lot in oil paints, and she was here in town a couple of years ago, and she gave me a quick little lesson, and I bought what she told me to buy, and I didn't buy an expensive set. I think I just got Reeves,
Mm-hmm.
which is, it's they're fine. They're not
Yeah.
super high quality, but I didn't want to place a lot of money in them, and it sat unopened for 2 years until a couple weeks ago. And for our mail art group, the last project that we did was manila envelope paintings.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a painting on a manila envelope on the big empty blank side, and then you could put stuff in it or not, and we mailed it to people with the painting on it, and then you put the address on the side with the flap.
Nice.
And I thought, you know what? I have never used those oil paints, and I want to do something a little different, so I'm going to get those out and play with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually will say I found the colors are really rich and really deep and a lot more vibrant. And they blend like a dream.
I
Like,
bet.
doing shading and I really liked the feel of them on the brush. But those motherfuckers take forever to dry.
Oh, yeah. My grandma used to paint with them. I remember she would, weeks later, she'd, scrape off a sailboat or something she'd painted.
Yeah. Well, I knew that they took a while to dry. But in true form, I waited till the last minute to start my project. So I started that painting the week before, like 7 days before I had to mail it. I left it over 4th of July weekend in my studio with the fan on while we went camping, and it did not fucking dry.
Oh, God.
So I was at the mercy of the paint. Like, it dried probably faster than it would dry on canvas because I thinned it down with turpenoid a little bit, which is an all natural turpentine. It's not turpentine. It's got orange shit in it. So, it's not as caustic and icky smelling. I thinned it down a little bit, and I did do it on paper, not canvas. But it still wasn't 100% dry when I mailed it out.
Oh,
Like, it was dry enough, and I sealed it a little bit with some of the Dorland's wax medium.
uh-huh.
And it smudged a little, but not a lot. And then I waited for that to dry on top, and I kind of buffed it. But I had to be careful about it because after the paint dried, my plan was that after the paint dried, I was going to glue some letters on, like, that I had cut out of a magazine. Because I'd made this little funny, like, hillbilly weird monster. She was pink with blue hair, and she had this, like, little half shirt on with her big fat hillbilly belly poking out. And I don't know, I was just in a weird monster mood. So I made this little monster, and I'll put a picture of it on the blog. But I used whatever the frick it's called, the gel medium to glue down letters that weren't sticking.
Oh, God.
So I had to just keep putting layers of gel medium over the top of the letters until they just there was so much on there dried that it just kind of stuck to each other. And
Did it make it?
I just messaged her today, and she messaged me back because she said that it arrived, and I asked her what the condition it was in, and she said it looked great. It made it okay. It didn't smudge. None of the letters ripped off. So thankfully it ended up working out. But I would definitely say that if you're going to use oil paints, don't do it on something that you have a time limit on at all.
Right, yeah.
That's just not smart.
Yeah.
Oil paints are, obviously, they're pigments ground in oil.
Mm-hmm.
So the oil is going to take much longer to dry than something that's water soluble.
Yeah, absolutely.
But speaking of water soluble, that is one of the disadvantages of oil paints, I think, is the cleanup.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more thorough. You often need things like turpentine to thin them down or clean your brushes.
Mm-hmm.
I use a product called Terpenoid that my friend Amy told me about. It's Terpenoid Natural, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really orangey smelling. It's like orange oil or something, but it is not it's still, you need ventilation when you use it.
Yeah.
So, and I think even some of the oil paints can be a little bit
toxic. Yeah, they can.
Toxic depending on the colors and the...
Yeah, I think that's why I've just always been scared to use them. Because they're so
you
toxic.
know what? I would say, though, honestly, play with them. The next time you're around in town and you want to come over, I'll let you play with my oil paints. They're fun.
Cool.
One cool thing about oil paints is now we're getting into the kind of paints that are more versatile. Like, you can use oil paints on many different surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just have to be one. It can be paper. It can be canvas. You can do it on wood. You can do it on fabric. Like,
that's awesome.
I really think that you can use different kinds of fabrics, but I wouldn't necessarily think that you could do it in the same way that you would with like acrylic paints.
Mm-hmm.
But
and they can be really textural too, can't they?
They can be very thick and textural, and you can put additives. And actually, the Dorland's wax medium that I use for sealing stuff is meant to be mixed with oil paints.
Oh, cool.
To build them up and make them thicker, or to stretch them and make the colors a little bit more transparent. So.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
And that is definitely one thing that I really noticed about the when I was mixing my paints and just looking at the oil paints, they are more vibrant, and I think you have more color selection than you do with acrylics.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I would think that they would be definitely more vibrant, for sure. So, yeah, so it sounds like you had a lot of fun with those. I remember my grandma would have fun. She would paint on fabric with them. She actually she painted all of these the cupboards in my parents' basement. That's used to be my grandparents' house. And I think the cupboards, I can't remember if they're wood or Formica, but she painted them all with oil paints, and it's like really textural.
Like a painting on them?
A painting on each of them. She used each of them like a canvas. Yeah.
Oh, that's so neat. Now I want to go to your parents' house. Is it still like that?
Yeah.
I want to go to your parents' house the next time you're around.
Yeah.
Say, pardon me, I'm sorry. I need to come in and look at your stuff. So
totally. Well, you have to go and look at my brother's stuff because it's in the basement, and that's his apartment.
Will your brother be okay with me looking at his stuff?
I think so.
All right. I hope so. Sharon has a super, super cute brother. I'm just saying. But I'm married, so, but...
So it's all good.
He's still super cute. But yeah, it's so funny that I get really intimidated by stuff like that, though. I'm afraid that there's, you get that little voice like, what if you don't know how to use them? Like, or what if you screw it up and do it wrong? But I forget that, like, in art, there's really not doing it wrong.
No, it doesn't matter.
So get brave and experiment. Like, any of these paints, if you've never used them before, give it a freaking try.
Yeah.
You don't have to show anyone if it didn't work out.
Yeah, totally.
So, and, you learn as you go. So, I feel silly that I let oil paints intimidate me for as long as I did, especially since I had a box of them sitting in my art supplies for 2 fucking years. that I didn't even break the plastic on.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Well, that's good that you got into them.
Yeah. I think I'm going to try doing a couple of just standard paintings. I'm really into monsters right now. I don't know why.
Yeah, you should totally do some canvases.
I think I want to do a little series of monsters and just make them look... Well, especially because if you're doing monsters, like, I don't do portrait work.
Yeah.
Just because I suck at it. So, but if you're just making up a creature in your own mind, like...
Yeah.
You're not fucking anything up because you're making up a creature in your own mind.
That's right.
That's the way you want it to look. You can always say, I meant to do that. Fuck off. So.
That's right.
But I saved my very favorite paint for last, which is acrylics. And I think acrylics came into use in the 50s, the 1950s, and they were a huge game changer for artists. Because, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I feel like acrylics are probably the most versatile paint that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have some huge pluses right off the bat, which is that they're really durable.
Mm-hmm.
You can use acrylic paint on any surface you want.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't think of anything that I haven't painted with acrylic paint. I even have a piece of glass that was like, I was going to try something on it one time, and then I forgot about it and let the acrylic paint dry on it. I can't get the fucking paint off of the painted glass.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Like, well, it's a little tiny one, so I would need like a scraper or something.
Yeah.
But I don't want to break it. But it's durable. It sticks around. You can use it on any surface, like fabrics, wood, canvas.
Oh, yeah.
I paint in books. I paint on all kinds of paper.
Mm-hmm. You can water it down.
Yeah, you can water it down and use it like watercolor. You can do washes.
Mm-hmm.
And then we covered, I think, in one of our... What was the episode? I think maybe our adhesives episode? I don't remember what we were talking about. We covered additives that you can add to acrylic paints. Like golden mediums. You can add gloss gel medium, matte gel medium, heavy bodied medium to build it up. You have mica powders that you can mix with it to make it sparkly, because sparkly shit is really rad. But I'm just gonna put that out there. And you talked about the beads, the gel mediums with beads in it that you
with the textures
to acrylic paint. Like, they're endless. I swear, I don't even know how many products that you can buy that are just made as they're just additives for acrylic paint.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really probably couldn't count them.
Right. Yeah. Go to the Golden website or go to your art store and look at all the Golden.
Go into your art store and stand in front of the Golden section, and this is what you'll hear.
Those are angels
singing. Yes. And a light will shine down upon you.
Yes, because they're golden.
They are. And everything around you will cease to exist because you will be in the best aisle in the whole fucking art store. So. That's
right.
But that got a little silly. But yeah, you can mix a lot of colors. They go well with anything. Like, I have honestly used them along with pastels, like soft pastels, charcoals. I've painted, like, drawn over the top of them with charcoals. They play well with all other media.
Yeah.
Really. And they're so much fun to experiment with. And another huge advantage, which is kind of a disadvantage too sometimes, is that they have a really fast drying time.
Mm-hmm.
You typically don't have to wait. Unless you do a really, really thick coating, you don't have to wait that long for them to dry. Sometimes they dry faster than you want them to. Like I said, sometimes it can be a disadvantage.
But there are retardants. Yeah,
you can buy fluid retarders that actually stretches out the paint and makes it dry a little bit slower. But I haven't noticed it really. Like, I think they still dry pretty fast even when you use that, don't you?
I haven't actually ever used them.
Yeah, no, I've only used them a couple of times. And in weather like this, I've actually held up a piece that I've been working on because I haven't wanted to paint in this weather because it's so hot.
Yeah.
But they just, like, really, you have to be quick when you work with them.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just, I think that's the only disadvantage that I can think of.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
They're not quite as vibrant as oil paints.
Yeah, but you can get some awesome colors.
Yeah, and you can mix a lot of colors, and there isn't as big an array to choose from as there is with oil paints.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think if you shop on the web, like I don't want to discourage people from going to their local art supply stores at all, because I think that's really important to do. But I think that art stores can only have so much in stock.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, hello, art supplies are expensive to have in stock, first of all. So,
Right.
But I think that if you go online on some of the, like the Golden website, or what the frick it's Windsor. Now I can't think of the brand that I like.
Windsor.
Yeah, Windsor. But is it Windsor and Newton or something like that? I want to say there's another.
I think it's just Windsor.
Yeah, that's my favorite brand of acrylic paints. I really, really like them. I like the ones that come in the metal tube.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like them a lot. I use the gallery.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I really love those. Those are my absolute favorite. I like
Windsor and Newton.
Windsor and Newton, yeah. I like they're really thick. They have just a nice texture to them and nice coverage, and they're my favorite. And right now, the last time I bought paint, I couldn't afford to buy them, so I had to buy something else, and I'm sorry.
Oh.
Now, it's the Liquitex, but they're the student line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're nice.
They're nice, but they're not quite as heavy as the gallery, the Windsor and Newton gallery ones.
Yeah.
I like so well. And I think that's who actually makes the fluid retarder that I use, and they sell it in like a big container.
Yeah.
So, but you could mix, I like mixing those paints a lot. Like, one of my favorite things to do is take the base color that I'm using, and then mix it out on my palette from, like, in one direction with white or a buff. There's one called something buff that I like. I like to mix it out. So I start with the deepest, richest color, and then I mix it down with the light, and then I do it in the opposite direction with the dark.
Oh, nice.
So when I'm doing shading or doing something like folds of fabric, you're painting something like that, you have this like really cool array of colors to choose from when you're going from light to dark. So.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, you have that nice range.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, acrylics are awesome.
They really are. And I've used acrylics too I've watered them down a little bit or thinned them down with either with water or with gel medium.
Oh, yeah.
Thin them down and make them really, really almost transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used them in place of stain. When I'm using balsa wood, I use it like a stain and rub it on.
Yeah.
I think the options are really endless with options.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think you can buy, cheap acrylics to just be able to play around with,
Yeah, and honestly, I do use a lot of cheap acrylics in a lot of my work. I tend to save the more expensive, like the Windsor and Newton ones for when I'm doing actual paintings or work that I intend to sell, like something that's I use them like when I paint my journals because they're going to be handled a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Lot, and it's a real nice heavy paint, and I know that it's going to be very durable. But when I'm doing like altered books or book work in other people's art journals and stuff like that, a lot of times I just use those acrylic craft paints that you can buy for like $1 a bottle.
Yeah.
Joann's. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to spend a lot of money on it. And sometimes I even like those better because they're a little bit thinner.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you want good coverage and good color saturation, but you don't want a thick paint.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So they're great. And I use that. As a matter of fact, when like I watch Joann's and stuff in their ads, and when their paints go on sale, they're those little tubes of the store brand craft paints. I go in and buy up a bunch in the colors that I use the most.
Oh, cool.
Because those work really great for like backgrounds. When I want to color a whole piece of paper in a book a certain color, then I use those.
Yeah, because you can just slather it on. Yeah, you don't need to worry.
I just like squirt it on the page and then smooth it around with a brush. So I always want to, in every episode and every time we talk about products and stuff like this, or we have an episode where we talk about a specific medium, I really feel like I want to remind people that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to buy the store brands. I mean, Sharon and I have our favorite brands, of course, and everybody does, but you don't have to do that.
Yeah, there are options.
Yeah. So don't feel like, don't get bewildered when you go into the art supply store and you look at the more expensive brands and see the price tags on some of them, because there's shit that I don't buy because I can't afford it.
Yeah.
Like once a year for my birthday, my mom gives me a $50 gift certificate to Dick Blick.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I buy my expensive shit. Like, I know I have $50, and then my husband usually, because I always spend more than $50. Are you kidding me? I go in there and I'm like, but this is on sale. So, but even if he chips in another $20, like, that's the time that I use to, like, get my big expensive crap. But the rest of the year, I'm a fucking starving artist like everybody else. Like, I have a family and I have to pay rent and put a roof over my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't afford all that fancy shit either. I mean, there's some stuff that I personally, because I sell my work, can't afford to not invest in in the long run, and I just have to wait until I sell art to get reimbursed for that. But if you're just doing it and as, a hobby, or you want to play around with stuff, or even if you're trying to sell your work and you can't afford it, there's nothing wrong with using a cheaper version. Or, like, I use a lot of the Reeves. So yeah, that is what we know about paint. So, and I did actually want to, before we go, the information that I got on this, for this episode, just so I could kind of tell you what the paints were made from and stuff, I got from a textbook that, one of the only textbooks I kept from graphic design school. Is called The Artist's Handbook, 3rd edition by Ray Smith. And I will post a link to it if I can find a link. I'm sure it's still sold. It is an awesome reference book for any artist to have around, and that's why I kept it. Most of them I sold back after I was done using them, but I really, really recommend this book, and I don't know why I haven't said anything about it sooner, because it's my go-to when I want to know about anything, or if I have a problem that I can't figure out. I always use this book, and it's a really super great, just artist handbook to have around. So
cool.
So I'll link that, but we're going to wrap things up now. And if you know anything about paints, like we didn't talk about some, I know, but I think we talked about what we're familiar with. I don't really know anything about tempera paints or anything else like that. So if there's something that we missed that you think we should know, or you just want to ask a question about another episode, or give us feedback, you can email us at 2artsygals@gmail.com. And again, I will link that book, and I will put some links up to some of the products that we talked about today in our show notes for this episode. And you can see that on our blog, which is 2artsygals.wordpress.com. And also, as always, you can subscribe to our podcast on Stitcher and iTunes, and put the free apps on your mobile device, or use it on your computer, and it will automatically update each episode, so you don't have to worry about when we post a new one. And you could leave us feedback on there, and that would be really awesome. So I guess that's it. So until next week, let's go make some cool shit.
Bye-bye.
Bye.